Deploying Azure Virtual Desktop can be complex and time-consuming. Wouldn't it be great if you could just press the AVD Easy button and have it all done for you?
I'm Dean Safola, and this is the Azure Academy.
In this episode, we're going to build AVD the easy way with the latest feature, the Azure Virtual Desktop QuickStart. And on the left, you can see that there's a new item in the blade called QuickStart. And right in the center, it lets us know what you'll be getting when you do this build process. One host pool, one app group, and one user. So let's click Create. Our first choice is if we have an empty or an existing subscription. Choose existing if you have either a traditional Active Directory that you want to use, or you want to use an existing Azure AD Domain Services, which is a Microsoft managed domain controller solution in the cloud. Both of them will work and are fully supported, but you'll have to pick one or the other, which we'll get to in a minute. If you select an empty subscription, the QuickStart will build Azure AD Domain Services for you, which will take roughly 40 minutes. And by the way, if you're hoping to extend your on-prem Active Directory into the cloud by using Azure AD Domain Services, then you better watch this video first because there's a lot of things you need to understand. Now we need a resource group prefix for the 2 or 3 resource groups that we'll be creating through the QuickStart. And I'll show you the differences between them at the end. But either way, this is going to make it easier to identify these resource groups. Then select the Azure region that you want to build in. I'll take East US as usual. And for the Azure account, this is referring to your Azure AD Global Admin credentials. And then we have the Domain Admin account. What you put in here will depend on if you chose existing or empty. If you chose empty, then this account will become your Azure AD Domain Services admin. But if you chose existing, this is the credentials that your VMs will use when joining your domain. One thing to keep in mind here is that you will not be able to specify the OU that your VMs will be joined to from the QuickStart. So if that's a requirement for you, then you'll have to pre-stage those computer objects in the right place. Now onto the identity box. If you chose empty, you'll only have one option here, Azure AD Domain Services. But if you chose existing, then you'll see both Active Directory and AADDS. Select the one that you want and click Next. On this screen, the first options here are to choose either yes or no. Yes will give you a pooled host pool, and no will build a personal host pool. Then we have your image. From the images drop-down, you can see the list of all the options that Microsoft has in the gallery and pick whichever one suits you, or you can select See All Images underneath it, and then you can go to My Items at the top, choose your own custom VM image, or if you have one in the shared image gallery, you can select that as well. Then we have our VM size. Now the default here is fine for me, but if you need something like a graphics card in your VMs, for example, change the VM to the appropriate size that best fits your needs. Then we have the number of VMs. This is how many virtual machine session hosts the QuickStart will build into your pool. Now, if you selected no at the top, then what you're saying is that you've got, for example, 30 users and you'll need 30 VMs. If you chose yes, then you wanted a pooled host pool, and for those 30 users, you have to decide now how many users you want on the same virtual machine at the same time. And for example, you could want 10 users on each VM, so you would just build 3. Now we need to select the virtual network that you'll want to build those VMs on. And finally, the resource group where your domain controllers are located. Now, one important thing to note here is that if you have existing domain controllers in the cloud, then they'll need to be within the same subscription that you selected at the beginning, because your resource group selections here are scoped to that subscription. So if you have multiple subscriptions like I do, and your DCs don't live in the subscription where you're building things through the QuickStart, then that's not going to work. Once you have the appropriate resource group selected, then go ahead and select one of your domain controllers. QuickStart will communicate with this domain controller using the credentials that you provided earlier to create your users and get your groups in here, which is the next step. Now, if you want to build a validation user, go ahead and check that box and add the appropriate UPN and password, and QuickStart will create this new user for you. And whether you choose to do that or not, you can also select existing users or groups and just check the box there for that. And then from the picker, as usual, go ahead and select who you want to give access to. Then click the next button and review everything. Once you're happy, click Create. And walking through the QuickStart is really that simple. But now let's take a look at what we're actually going to get when we do this. We have two resource groups. They have my prefix, and we have one that is labeled deployment and the other WVD. If you had chosen an empty subscription, you would have gotten a third resource group labeled prerequisite. This would have been a dedicated resource group for your Azure AD Domain Services instance. Looking at the deployment resource groups, we see an Azure Automation account and runbooks. This is the magic behind the easy button process, and it's a great example of work smarter, not harder. These automation runbooks did all of the work in coordination with the ARM templates to build everything for you. And if you want to unlock your full potential in the cloud, you should be investing in your automation skills so you can do cool things like the AVD Easy button.
That was easy.
And the last resource group here is for our environment. Here you'll find the AVD resources such as the host pool, app group, and workspace. You'll also find the session host VMs along with their network cards and disks. Now, if you chose to build a personal host pool, that's it for you. But if you built a pooled host pool like I did, then you will also have a storage account and managed identity. This is for my FSLogix user profiles, and the managed identity helped set up Active Directory authentication to my storage account, so I didn't have to. Now, as for my experiences with this tool, overall, I love it. The only issue that I ran into in the QuickStart was one of the prerequisite runbooks having a failure. And I've already talked to the product group about this, so hopefully we'll get an update in there soon. By default, the validation users group that you can see here in Active Directory will be created in the users container. Now, this validation group must be synced into Azure AD for the process to complete successfully. And this goes back to how you have Azure AD Connect configured. In my case, I sync from the corp OU down through the rest of that tree. So I don't sync the entire directory, and I wasn't syncing the user's container. So my runbook was failing. And my temporary fix until the product group gets around this was to pre-stage the WVD validation users group into the OU that is being synced into Azure. Once I did that, everything worked like a charm. As for build times, if you chose an empty subscription, this will take about an hour and a half, and most of that time is actually in building Azure AD Domain Services. If you chose the existing subscription model, this will take about 20 minutes. So to see how RDP ShortPath fits in, let's look at the new diagram that's in the WVD docs and talk through reverse connect for a second. Over on the left, when we go to our client, that client will subscribe to WVD and they'll log in. The web access role will give them all of the icons for the things that they're allowed to click on, and that's their remote apps and desktops. But even though they have those icons, they don't have access. They have to click on one of those icons and authenticate in order to be able to get in through the WVD service to get to those applications. So reverse connect, starting at port TCP 443, routes over the public internet through the WVD gateway service, which communicates with the broker. The broker will figure out which systems in your environment are available for your user connection, and then you will get an outbound connection from the session host through the gateway back to your client. This is the reverse connect model. Now in RDP ShortPath, almost everything is the same. Instead of having to go back through the gateway and then get your session host to communicate reverse back to you, instead your client gets to go directly to the session host. When you use reverse connect, you're going out through the cloud, through the public internet to do all that connectivity back to your environment. With RDP ShortPath, you don't have to go over the public internet. This can be done privately on your own network, which gives us some other benefits and options. For example, your express route can now take your WVD traffic. So can your point-to-site or site-to-site VPNs. And you can also choose to do this over a public IP address sitting on top of your session host, although generally I don't like to use that because it's one more thing to manage, and if you don't secure that public IP address correctly, you could end up with more than you bargained for. Now this can be done in a few different ways, which we'll talk about in a minute, And we can do this because there's a change in protocol. Reverse connect functions over TCP 443, pretty much an internet standard for how a lot of things work. However, there are some drawbacks. For one thing, the efficiency is not as great as UDP, but to sum it up, basically TCP is much heavier as a protocol. There's more handshakes, there's more packets, error checking, resending, all that stuff. UDP ends up being a much more efficient protocol for sending data like voice over IP or connection to your WVD server. The way WVD already works is there are certificates that are on your session host that are validated through the WVD client when you go to connect, and RDP ShortPath is very similar. There are TLS connections that are made between your client and your session host, and that's secured using that same certificate, and that certificate gets on the session host when it is built and set up. But this does give you a place where you can choose, if you want to have your own managed certificates from your own authority. But something to consider if you are going to use ShortPath is bandwidth, which means if you have a large bandwidth requirement, the pipe that you're using for RDP ShortPath has to be able to carry that load. And up until now, we haven't had a very good way of quantifying all that information for you. But in the WVD docs, there is now a new page for bandwidth considerations. There's a pretty detailed walkthrough of what you can expect when you look at particular types of data or workloads in your sessions. For example, you can go from a 0.3 kilobits per second data stream when you're just sitting there idle looking at your desktop or your application, down to a 3 megabit connection if you're streaming full screen 4K video with an H.264 encoder. But this also means that you can do quality of service and do traffic shaping. And I'll show you how to get started with that in just a minute. For now, let's set up RDP ShortPath.
If you want to master the Azure cloud, you can start right now by clicking the subscribe button and the notification bell so you don't miss anything.
So there's several ways that you could get this set up, and I'm going to show you how to do this for a test machine right now by editing the registry directly. So here in the Windows registry, we're going to go into HKey local machine and then go into system, current control set, control, and then we're going to scroll all the way down until we get to terminal server, and inside terminal server, we'll go to Win Stations and then right click over here, and we're going to add a new D word. And this D word is going to be use UDP port redirector, and we're going to set that value to 1. And then we're going to add another D word, and this is going to be UDP port number, and we're going to set that to 3390. And that's it. That's how you get it set up and tested. And you should do a reboot before you actually try this, but that's just for setting up a single machine. Now we're going to flip over to my domain controller, and I've got PowerShell open here with a little bit of code that I pulled right out of the Azure docs. And this code is going to set up for us a new group policy that we're going to set up for RDP ShortPath. So at the top, I've got two variables, one that's going to pull in my domain name, and the other is the name of the new GPO I want to create, RDP ShortPath. And then we'll create that GPO and then add these two things to it, which are the same registry entries that we just did. So here is my GPO, and let's go into the policies and look at the registry, and there are our settings. So now that's how you can implement it for a single test machine and also through a GPO. Now there are some other things we want in our GPO since we're here. Let's go down to Windows settings, security settings, and then we're going to go to Windows Defender Firewall for advanced security to our inbound rules. So on our rule type, we'll select a custom rule, hit next, and then on our next screen here, we want to select the second option, a program path, and we're going to put in exactly %systemroot%/system32/svc host.exe and hit next. And on our next screen for our protocol type, UDP, set our specific port for 3390 and then hit next. And here on the scope page, we're going to set it for all IP addresses and hit next. Our action will be allowed. Next, our profile will be for all three profile types. Give your rule a name and then hit finish. Now, I forgot one thing. If we go back into the rule up top here, right click on that and go to properties, and then at the top go to the program and services tab, and then click the settings button for your service. We want to specifically set this to remote desktop services for terminal server. All right, that way we'll get the rule to apply against the right service. So just hit OK, and close all that stuff. And then let's pop over to Azure, and we want to make sure that if we have a network security group or firewall rule in place, that we want to edit that to allow our UDP. So here's my network security group, and I'll go to the inbound security rules and click add. So our scope and our scope port will be just leaving those alone as any. Our destination, we're going to leave as any, and then we'll set our destination port for 3390, select our protocol as UDP, set it to be allowed, give it a appropriate priority, and then name the rule so that we know what in the world this thing is, and then put in a description that matches your stuff. So I'll hit add on that. And now that we have our rule, it's time to do a test. So let me open my WVD client, and it'll be easiest to show this if I just go into my full desktop. So we'll double click on that, put in our credentials so we authenticate. Now at the very top of the screen, you see we have that connection bar. I want you to click on the graph there. That's what tells us what our connection speed and type and all of that information is doing. And when you do, hit the show details, and there you can see we've got our UDP set up, and I've got a 15 millisecond latency. Not too bad going over a point-to-site VPN. Let me show you a few other ways you can tell that you've got UDP working right. Here's the Windows Event Viewer, and you can find the path to this exact log in the docs. And I've sorted everything here by the event ID. The one that we want is 131, and you can see the description there says connected by UDP. But what about from the Azure side? Can we see that we've done a UDP connection from there? So back in Azure, I'll go to my log analytics space where I've got all my monitoring stuff set up. And if you missed that, we've got all that covered in another video in our WVD series. Go check out that playlist. So if I go into the logs section in log analytics, I'm going to run a query against WVD connections. And then we scroll down here to find the UDP use equals 1. That means this session was connected by UDP. And that's our RDP ShortPath. And one last thing that we'll cover today is quality of service. So I'll go back to my RDP ShortPath group policy. Under our computer configuration, we'll go to Windows settings and then policy-based QoS. And we'll create a new policy. I'll call this RDP ShortPath. We'll set our DSCP to 46, and then we're going to hit next, leave the specified outbound throttle alone. And for our applications, again, we'll put the SVC host.exe and hit next. We'll leave it from any IP source or destination, hit next, set our protocol to UDP, the port to 3390, you get the idea, and then hit finish. And there is our QoS policy. So just to recap, you can see it was real simple to set up RDP ShortPath, which you could do just testing by going to the registry yourself or implementing it through group policy. Just be sure to remember that any firewalls or network security groups that you have make allowances for UDP port 3390. And just be sure that you've got enough bandwidth in your network pipe if you're sending this data over your ExpressRoute or VPN. Now there have been a ton of videos burning through the interwebs on Windows 11 and hardware requirements. And we're going to need to use those in Azure as well, and that means we need Gen 2 VMs along with a TPM chip running Secure Boot. And this was all covered in a new preview feature called Trusted Launch, and we went over the basics of that in my last video, which you should watch before you continue. Go ahead, I'll wait. All caught up? Cool. Now, if this is your second or third time that you're here and you haven't subscribed yet, that's the universe telling you you need to click the subscribe button. We're gonna build a Windows 11 virtual machine in Azure Virtual Desktop, and I already have a host pool set aside for Windows VM session hosts. So click up top and generate yourself a new registration key and save that over to your notepad because we'll need it in a minute. Then go to your session host on the left and click the add button at the top. Click next on the first screen, and let's go right over there and select See All Images, and then search for Windows 11. Scroll down just a little bit, and there they all are. Notice that they're all marked with Preview, because Windows 11 is not officially released yet, but we're gonna go all the way today and select Windows 11 Multi-Session plus Microsoft 365 apps, which will give us all of those Office and Teams with AV redirection baked right in. We've got a problem. Now, this is not really a problem with the location, but rather you can't build Windows 11 through the AVD portal yet. Now we've got a few methods we can do to get this working today. First thing we could do is just deploy a normal Windows 11 VM. Now to do that with trusted launch, like we covered in my previous video, you're gonna need this special link to get to a preview version of the Azure portal. Now there are certain images that are allowed for trusted launch, and technically Windows 11 is not on the list. And that's not really a big shock because it's not officially released yet. But if you go through this process, it'll work, trust me. So go ahead and select your Windows 11 image. I'll just pick Windows 11 Enterprise for this. When you get over to the advanced screen, scroll down to the bottom, make sure that you have a Gen 2 VM selected, and then go ahead and check the box for trusted launch, and then check the following boxes for secure boot and VTPM. Complete the rest of your build as normal, and then inside the OS, once it boots up, download the agents, install them with your registry token that we generated earlier, and you are good to go. Just repeat that for all of your session hosts, which does sound like a lot of work. So we can automate this a little more if we just add a custom script extension. So let's walk through the build again. This time we'll select Windows 11 multi-session. Then on the advanced screen at the bottom, be sure that you check Gen 2 and secure boot, VTPM, and all that stuff. And then scroll back up to the top of the advanced screen and you want to select to add an extension. Scroll down and find the custom script extension, then hit the add at the bottom. Now the link for the PowerShell script we're going to give it is in the video description below that takes you out to my GitHub, and you can follow the directions right here with me. Go ahead and hit the browse button and then select whichever storage account you want to use. Inside there, if you don't have a container already, you'll need to create one, but I've got one already called extensions, but you can call it anything you like. Inside there, click the upload button, and then over here, you want to click the blue folder, and that'll give you this file dialog. Just paste in the link to the PowerShell script that's in the video description, and then click the upload button. And there you go, the script is loaded right over there. Go ahead and select it and then hit the button at the bottom. And now we need to give it the arguments. These are those input parameters. And in this case, there are two of them. The first one is -profile path, and then that'll be your SMB share where FSLogix goes. And then after that, you put a space, -registration token, and then you paste the registration token that you saved to your notepad earlier. Let the rest of the build continue as normal, and then your VM will be built and automatically joined to your host pool. Let's take this to the next level. And I've already done all of the work for you and made everything super easy. So I've got a link in the video description that'll take you here to my GitHub page, and I've got an easy button there for you. Go ahead and click that, and you'll be deploying Windows 11 for Virtual Desktop. And this template will allow you to build up to 100 Windows 11 session hosts at the same time. Just fill it out, and at the bottom here, make sure you put in your file share where FSLogix profiles will be stored, and then paste in your registration key that you saved earlier to your notepad. Then go ahead and hit build. And in just a few minutes, that'll be done, and you can pull up your virtual desktop client, sign right in, and there you go, Windows 11 session host deployed for Azure Virtual Desktop so that you can start testing with nothing else required right now. Here's my AVD Windows client starting my desktop session, logging in as the user Cyborg. So far, everything looks normal, right? Now let's open up a command prompt and you'll see that I'm logged in as the user Cyborg on the host of AVD Join-0. Now I'll type in the command dsregcmd /status. This shows all of the possible join states for your session hosts. And here at the top, you can see that I'm Azure AD joined. And notice that the domain joined says no. And if we scroll down a little bit, you can see all my Azure AD tenant information. And most importantly, if we scroll down to the SSO section, you can see the Azure AD PRT here says yes. This is the Azure Active Directory primary refresh token. And those are issued to you when you log on a client that is joined and you're logged in with a user account that is in the same Azure Active Directory tenant. And it's this PRT that gives you a single sign-on experience within the session host, which you can see when I open the Azure portal. So you see that everything works here, but before we go on, let's get two things out of the way. First, this feature is in preview. And what I'm showing you here today is just the first step, so please comment below with all of your feedback so this feature can continue to improve. Second, in this video, we're going to cover the basics of Azure AD Join, and we're going to focus in on our personal host pool scenario. And at the end of this video, I'll link to my next video in this series talking about advanced options and pooled host pools, because there's some tricky things to be aware of. Now that you get all that out of the way, let's get it set up. In the AVD admin portal, let's create a new host pool. And you're going to fill out all the standard stuff here. So that would be your subscription, resource group, name of your pool, and your location. Also, during the preview, the validation environment must be set to yes, and that's going to do some things under the covers to make all of this work. For our host pool type, we're going to select personal, and I'll just leave it on automatic, and then click next. Now for our virtual machines, we're going to come back and do this in a minute because I want you to see some other things first. So just leave it on no for now and click next. And let's create a new workspace. And you just give it a name, and that's all you do with workspaces today. Hit next and then add all of your standard tags. Adding tags is always a good idea, and it just helps you track what's going on in your environment, as well as provide a way to add some extra automation later on. And then when you're ready, hit the review and create button. And this will create your host pool, app group, and workspace. So now that our pool has finished building, inside the pool on the left, go to your app groups, and then on the left of the app groups, go to assignments. We need to add our users here so that they can have access just like with every other pool. So hit add at the top, and in the picker, select the appropriate groups. All of that is the standard virtual desktop stuff that you've always done. From here, there's a couple unique things you need to do for Azure AD Join to work. Now, if you think about your traditional login for virtual desktop, there's one login for Azure Active Directory and then another login that is a domain-based login. And that traditional domain login is what users actually log on to their systems. And we have to have something in place that replicates that kind of permission. So in your resource group, where your host pool and your session host VMs will be located, you want to go to access control on the left, and then we need to add two specific role assignments. And at the bottom here, you can see mine. We have a virtual machine admin login, and then a virtual machine user login. And this is what the Azure AD Join process is going to use to know which users are allowed to log on to these session hosts and which admins are allowed. And then for the virtual machine user login, I added the same group that I granted permissions on my app group. That way, when there's any change to the users inside that group, that change will be reflected in both places automatically. And that'll just make management a little bit easier. In your host pool over here on the left, you want to go to RDP properties, and then click right over to the advanced tab. And we need to add a new property in here called target is AAD joined :I:1. And this lets the host pool know that it's supposed to rely on Azure AD Join. This property will also make it possible for you to use any of the supported AVD clients. Without it, you'd only be allowed to use the Windows client. So definitely something that you want to add to your pools to make life easier for all of your users. Okay, so those are the things that we needed to do that's different for Azure AD Join. Let's build our session hosts. So over on the left of your host pool, go to session host and hit add at the top. And of course, everything on this first screen can't be changed because that's all related to the pool. Hit next, and then select your resource group where you've assigned those user permissions and put in your name prefix. I'll pick AAD Join. My virtual machine locations will be in East US 2, and I'm going to use availability zones, and I'll just select zone 1. For your image, you can use any supported image here. I'll pick Windows 10 20H2 and scroll down. Set your VM size and how many VMs you want in the pool. And I'll enable the boot diagnostics as well. That's good for troubleshooting later on. And then select the appropriate network in the East US 2 region where you want your VMs deployed. And because I have an NSG already attached to that subnet, I'm going to leave the network security groups here set to none. And scroll down. And notice that there is a new field here for domain to join. And by default, it is on Active Directory. And if you did that, then you would fill this out just like you always have with all of your domain information as well as any local username and password. But now you can select that dropdown and pick Azure Active Directory. And when you do, a lot of those extra fields related to your traditional domain are removed, And all you have to do now is fill out your local username and password for the virtual machines and decide whether or not you want to enroll your devices with Intune, also known as Endpoint Manager. And I'll select yes for that. And then hit next, add all of your standard tags like I know you will, then hit next to review, and notice here at the bottom we have Azure Active Directory again as our domain join type. And when you're ready, go ahead and build. Now, once the build is complete, if you go over to Azure Active Directory and you go down the blade to Devices, here in the Devices section, I've got my two new virtual machines, Azure AD Join 0 and 1. And notice under the MDM column here that they say Microsoft Intune, which means that they have successfully been enrolled with Endpoint Manager. And just so you can see the other side of things, here's the Endpoint Manager console opened to my devices, and you can see our Azure AD Join VMs are there without us having to do anything, all because we selected Enroll in Intune during the provisioning process. One last thing I wanted to talk about is the logins with online identities. There's a security policy called Allow PKU to You. And if things are not set right, you might see users getting password errors even though they're typing the right password. Now you can find this setting in your local policies security options, and it's called Network Security Allow PKU to You Authentication. And I purposely disabled it here. But if you go to the Explain tab, you'll see that by default, Windows 10 1607 and newer has this policy enabled. So why bring this up? Well, it's because we're coming from our traditional domains, and it is recommended in your traditional domains to actually disable this policy. And the reason for that is you don't want people logging in with online identities in your domain. You want them using domain credentials. Now, most of you won't have to do anything about this, but I did want to mention it just in case you run into this issue, and this doc will be linked in the video description, along with the special portal link you'll need to use Azure AD Join while it's in preview. Now, I'll just go back and re-enable the PKU to You policy so I can log in with my online identities, and bingo. So just make sure that this policy is enabled on your local Windows client devices as well as your AVD session hosts. Now, to get a full understanding of what this feature is and how it's going to help you, let's start at the beginning. What in the world is MSIX? Well, it is the next generation version of a packaging format. We've had MSIs for forever, and now we have MSIX. Now, one of the things that makes this packaging format so cool is that it's basically container-based, taking that package and basically dump the contents of it into a virtual hard drive, and that virtual hard drive can be placed on a file share of any kind in any location, which can then be attached to your WVD session hosts. And then the user simply needs to be registered with the app manifest file so that they can see the application and open it. As for performance, there's two things that you need to know. First of all, attaching the virtual hard drive will cost you 1 IOP. That's right, 1 IOP. Once the drive is attached, the MSIX container will be inflated, and the I/O will depend a little more on what's inside the package. The larger and more complex the data, the more I/O you need. On the permissions side, there's two parts as well. This is one of the beauties of MSIX App Attach, and that is that the hard drives are mounted in a read-only state, so the users on the other end can't mess with the application. The other side of this is the session hosts. And much like FS Logics, the Active Directory computer objects for those session hosts will need access to the file share as well as NTFS permissions. Now, if you're using Azure Files with AD or Azure AD Domain Services Authentication, you'll have to grant the SMB Share Contributor role to those computer objects, and the best way to do that is through a single group. I'll show you that in a minute. One more little detail around this would be your user data. So we've got the application mounted, and that's read-only. Where does the user write the data related to that application? in their user profile, just like always. For example, you have VS Code that has a settings and configuration file that would be in the user app data folder. So what does that mean for you? Well, ultimately, it could mean that your images no longer need to exist. You can rely on Microsoft's gallery images, simplifying your WVD processes. Your applications will be provided through App Attach, and then any customizations and security requirements could all be filtered down to the machines through group policies, which ultimately could turn WVD into a virtually managementless solution, which would be a big saver in time, money, and complexity. So this sounds awesome. How can we get started? Well, it all begins with an application. That application comes in some kind of format. We have to take whatever that application is and make an MSIX package out of it. And for that, we need a tool. Say hello to the MSIX packaging tool. This is a free tool right out of the Microsoft Store, and of course you could use other third-party tools to create your applications. But the reason why I like this one is 1, it's free, 2, it's really simple. And since I'm not an app developer, that sounds good to me. So when you first run the tool, you've got 3 options. And the first one is where we're going to start creating an app package. So now we have to select the environment that we want to create our package from. So we'll choose the first option to create a package on our local computer and hit next. Now there's going to be a packaging driver that is loaded onto the system. This is basically going to monitor the entire system, file system, registry, services, all that stuff, to monitor for changes. And that's how it knows what to put inside the package. And now we have to select our application, and you just click Browse for that, find your file, and then after that, you can add any specific arguments to that file if you need to. Now we have our signing preference, and this is where we need to provide a code signing certificate in order to finish this package. That way it'll be a trusted package, and every machine that you install this package on will also need that certificate. The most preferred way to do that, of course, would be through an online certificate authority or your own CA that the machines already trust. If you don't know how to run your own certificate authority, I've got something you could use in your own lab for testing, and that is PowerShell. This is a quick script that I wrote. It's up on my GitHub, link in the description below, and this will generate for you a self-signed certificate. Just be sure to edit the DNS name and the subject so that they can be the right things for your environment. And the next line, we're generating a password because this is going to be a PFX file. Then we'll just export that to finish it out. Now that we have our PFX file, we need to get that installed on all of our session hosts. More about that in a minute. And also we can present it back to our packaging tool. So I'll go ahead and select the Sign with Certificate PFX, provide the password, and now we've got our package information. So I'll just give my package a name and a display name, and then a description of my package, and I'll hit next. And at this point, this is the coolest part of using this tool. What it's going to do is actually a normal standard installation of your application. The beauty of it is, because you're already familiar with how to install this application, this should be a breeze. And once you're finished with all of that stuff, you can push next and you'll be prompted for, are you sure that you're done packaging? But we're all done here. We can click next, and then we select a location where we want to save our package, and then click Create. Now that we have an MSIX file, now we've got to make it into a hard drive. Now the code for all this is available in the WVD documentation, which is linked down below. And you've got to download this MSIX tool, also linked in the documentation. And then you just run this PowerShell script down here at the bottom. That's the important stuff. And that will take your MSIX package and dump the contents into your virtual hard drive. So I've copied down that code as well as some other code from the Virtual Desktop documentation to create a virtual hard drive using the Hyper-V PowerShell modules. Now, if you don't have that module installed, you can either install it or just go right over here to the Disk Configuration Manager. At the top, go ahead and click Action and create VHD, and then you can either type in the path or click Browse. Give it an appropriate size for whatever your application needs, and then I would suggest selecting VHDX, which will default also to dynamic allocation. This should keep your disks as small as possible. Once the disk has been created, you'll want to right-click and initialize it, and then we need to format it in NTFS, and you know how to do that, so I'll just zip past that and go back to PowerShell. Now that we have our disk, we can run the MSIX mgr command, which is going to extract the data out of our package and put it into our virtual hard drive. Once the process is done, you can see in our X drive, we've got a bunch of stuff, and in there you'll find the app manifest file as well as a VFS folder, and in there is where the contents of our package are located. Then just go back to the disk manager and right click and dismount the disk. And here it is on my local file system, which I will now copy up to the file share that I'm using. So over in Active Directory, we need to be sure that the group we're going to set up is being synced by Azure AD Connect, which for me is under the Corp OU. So I'll go into my WVD OU, and there are my computers. I'll just select them all, right click, and then go to Add to Group. And then I'll search for MSIX App Attach, that's my group, and then hit check name, and we are good to go. Make sure you give it enough time for Azure AD Connect to sync the group into Azure, or just force a sync yourself. Then verify over in Azure Active Directory under Groups, and you should see your group. Next, we'll go over to Azure Files so we can grant that side of the permissions. We'll go to my file share to App Attach, and then over on the left, go to Access Control IAM, and then at the top, click the Add button and add a role assignment. Over here, you want to select the drop-down at the top for your role. We want the storage file data SMB share contributor. All right, and then just search for your group, MSIX App Attach in my case, select that and hit save. There's the group with the correct permissions. Now we need the NTFS side. So go back to your server and I'll right click on my share and go to properties, then go to the security tab, click edit, and then type in the name of the group, MSIX App Attach, and then the permissions that it has by default here, the read and execute, that's all we need. And the last part of the prep are the certificates that we created. Find your PFX file, double click it, and we want to add this to the local machine, and then put in your appropriate password, and then select a specific certificate store, which in this case will be called Trusted People, and then click Next, and that should import your certificate successfully. And just repeat the process if you happen to have more than one certificate. Now let's go to the Azure portal and set up MSIX App Attach.
If you want to master the Azure cloud, you can start right now by clicking the subscribe button and the notification bell so you don't miss anything.
Now at the time I'm recording this video, this feature in the portal is in preview, so there is a sign up form where your subscription has to be whitelisted, and there is a special portal link. Again, all that information in the description down below. But once the feature is GA, you can just go into the normal Azure portal and have fun. So here in the portal, click on the host pool that you want to add your package to, and then there it is, the MSIX packages. So just go ahead and click that, and then at the top, click Add. Now we just need to provide the UNC path to your virtual hard drive. Now when you put in the UNC path, what happens behind the scenes? Well, the certificate and the computer permissions to the share will be verified, and then the MSIX container will be inflated so you can see what's in that app manifest file. Then you'll be able to click this drop down and see the list of the applications, and you can add a display name as well. Then you set the registration type as well as should this be an active or inactive package, and then you click Add at the bottom. So let's go over to our application groups. And now that you have your MSIX package loaded, when you go to add that group, check it out. Now you've got MSIX packages and you can select your application. From here, it's standard WVD app management. So when I launch the application, everything is normal for WVD. My Windows profile gets loaded onto the system. I get logged into the machine, and then the application will launch. Let's spend a minute and talk about how MSIX App Attach is going to help you manage WVD. Now, there are three main use cases in WVD: the personal desktops, and then the pooled desktops and remote applications. Personal desktops always need to be patched and maintained because they're somebody's personal computer. But for pooled and remote apps, we should be doing things differently. No matter what you're using, all your session hosts have been built from an image. So let's talk about that image. This generally has a few things in it: Windows, policy and configurations, security baselines, maybe some IT-related monitoring tools or antivirus tools, and then your applications. And most people have a whole process in order to create or update that image, and maybe you've even automated the whole thing like we did in our previous video with the Azure Image Builder, and that's great if you have done that. But I want to do things a little bit different. Microsoft builds and maintains images for all the supported operating systems and their versions in the Microsoft Gallery, and that means that you can select an updated version of that image at any time and deploy a VM from it. So I'd suggest that you don't need to have Windows in your custom image. But wait, there's more. We have those policies and configurations and security baselines, and all that stuff can usually be pushed out through Active Directory Group Policy or your own MDM solution like Microsoft Endpoint Configuration Manager, which we will have a video about soon, so click that subscribe button so you don't miss it. And I'd say that those things don't need to be in an image either. As for all those IT support tools, Azure Monitor will be able to push out its monitoring tools through policy automatically to all of your systems, and you can even automate the deployment of something like Microsoft Defender Advanced Threat Protection. So those don't need to be in the image either. And finally, we have the applications. And for that, we have just two words, MSIX App Attach. Or is that three words? Anyway, with MSIX App Attach as the last piece of the puzzle, we can step away from that traditional way of managing your systems and move forward with more of a DevOps mindset in managing WVD and the cloud. And the idea for this, of course, comes from saving money in the cloud and giving users the ability to start VMs when they need them without giving away all of the Azure permissions that you need to keep safe and secure. And the conflict here has been that you, as the administrator, want that VM turned off if it's not being used so you can save money, but the user still needs access to it whenever they need. And this is especially true in personal desktops, which are one of the three scenarios around WVD today, because it's a one-to-one relationship, one user to one VM. And that may have meant that they would have called the help desk and said, please turn on my VM, which is a big inconvenience to the user. Or we did a video like this in the past using an Azure Power App where the user could be given an application that they could start and stop their VM when they wanted. But now with Start VM on Connect, this is baked right into the WVD service. And the way that this basically works is you as the administrator still get to decide the basic schedule for the VM. But now the user gets to turn on the VM whenever they need it, even outside those business hours without having to contact anybody. When they go to log on, the service will see that their VM is turned off and it will turn it back on for them. They can log in, do what they need to do, and everyone's happy. Okay, so that's going to get our VMs turned on and the users are happy, but what about saving money? How do I get the VM to turn off? Now, there's nothing that is part of the Start VM on Connect service that's going to turn the VM off. If the user goes to start and clicks shutdown, that'll turn Windows off, but the VM itself will still be running and you'll be paying for it. So the only way to stop that meter from turning is to deallocate the VM. And thankfully, there are other solutions in the cloud that already do this. So I'll be walking you through a solution that will stop the VM automatically for you. And then Start VM on Connect will still give the user flexibility to turn the machine on when they need it. And at the point of recording this video, this new feature is in public preview. And I know the WVD product team would love your feedback. And so in the description down below, I'll have a link to Tech Community where you can post some of that feedback or just give me a comment down below and I'll be sure that the product team gets that. And since this is in public preview, there are a few limitations to keep in mind. First is that this feature only applies today to personal host pools. And that personal host pool could be configured either for automatic or direct assignment. So either one will work, but there is no support currently for pooled host pools. That's your remote desktops or remote applications. So this is going to be really quick and easy to get set up. Let's jump over to the Azure portal and implement Start VM on Connect.
If you want to master the Azure cloud, you can start right now by clicking the subscribe button and the notification bell so you don't miss anything.
So here I've got the Windows WVD client, and support right now is only for the Windows client or the HTML5 web client, so just keep that in mind. I've already got my host pool set up, as you can see in the background, and let's just start a session with our personal desktop and see what happens. And when we do, we get a message saying that we could not log you on because there aren't any resources available. So let's take a look in the Azure portal and see what's going on. And you can see right away over here that we have an unavailable host, and we do only have one host in this pool. So if we go to the very left under session hosts, there we can confirm that our virtual machine is unavailable. Now you can get to your VM just by clicking on the name, and this is the summary screen for everything going on with this virtual machine, and over there on the left, just click the name again, and that'll take you to the VM blade, and there's the answer why there are no resources available. The VM is turned off. And Start VM is going to help us fix that. So let's go back to the host pool. And on the left, we've gone into the host pool properties, and here in this bottom section where the configuration is, notice that we have our assignment type as direct, but it could be automatic just as well. And then right under that is the radio button for Start VM on Connect. So let's flip that to on, and then go ahead and hit save at the top. Now that enables the feature within this host pool, but there's a few other things to do. At the top search bar, let's type in subscriptions, and then go ahead and click that. Select the particular subscription where your host pool is located. And then over on the left, we want to go to Access Control IAM. And then at the top, we want to click the Add button, and then just click Add Custom Role. And what we're doing here is creating a role that's going to have the specific permissions that the WVD service will need in order to turn on the VM for us. Now, if you've never created a custom role before, it's not too difficult to do, and I've even made the process simpler for you. So I'll open up another tab in my browser and go out to my GitHub, and I will have this link in the video description below, so that makes it easier for you. And here we have all the details needed to make that custom role. And it's going to have two basic permissions. One is to read virtual machines, and the other is to start virtual machines. And the easiest way you can add this into your Azure environment is with this raw button right here. So go ahead and click that. And then in your browser's address bar, just copy the entire URL and then go back to the Azure portal. And then you want to select this third radio button, Start from JSON. And then you've got a blue box right over here so that you can pick a file. Go ahead and click that. And then in this line for the file name, go ahead and paste the URL right in there and click Open. And that should have preloaded everything that you need in order to finish this process. But just so you can see what's here, go ahead and click Next. And there are the two permissions that we're granting, like I said before, Start Action and VM Read, and hit Next again. And now we have to set what's called an assignable scope. This is where this role is going to be available. So you want to hit this Add Assignable Scope button. And now we get this picker over here with our subscription and every resource group in that subscription. So now the question is, where should you create this role? Well, if all of your WVD resources are in one resource group and only one resource group from now until the end of forever, go ahead and select the resource group. If, however, your WVD resources are spread over multiple resource groups, select the subscription. So in my case, I'll select the subscription, and when you've selected everything appropriately, hit the Add button at the bottom. And now we've got that scope finished. Let's hit Next. And there you can see the same JSON that we pulled out of the GitHub, and go ahead and hit the Review and Create button. And there's the summary of what we're going to do and the scope that you're going to add it to, and hit Create. And in just a second, that'll finish, and you should have this banner at the top that you successfully created a custom role. Hit OK. So now we have to grant the permissions for the custom role we just created. And if for you that was at a resource group level, go ahead to your resource group now and back to access control. But since mine is at the subscription level, I can do it right here. So go ahead and hit Add again, and this time add a role assignment. And now you'll get the picker showing up right over here. And at the top, you want to select the role dropdown. And now you can search for the particular role. And if you're using the one from my JSON file, just type in the word start, and that'll filter it down for you to desktop virtualization, Start VM on Connect. And now that we have the role selected, we need to decide who we're assigning this to. In this case, it's going to be the WVD service. So in this search bar, type in Windows Virtual Desktop. And you might have several entries like I do, so you want the one that only says Windows Virtual Desktop. And once you've added that at the bottom, go ahead and click Save. And just to verify, you can go to the Role Assignments tab, and you can see down here in the middle, we've got Desktop Virtualization Start VM on Connect assigned to the Windows Virtual Desktop service. So now I've gone to the resource group where my particular host pool and VM is located, and I'll go back to Access Control. And then I've gone back to Role Assignments, and there it is, Start VM on Connect, assigned to the Windows Virtual Desktop service, and it's inherited from the subscription scope. And so now that we have Start VM Connect enabled on our host pool, and we have the right permissions for the service to do its job, let's test it. So we're back in the client, and I'll just double click on the session desktop. And if I zoom in, you can see it says starting remote PC. Now, how long should this take? Well, it's as long as it takes the virtual machine to start, have the WVD agents start up and report back to the service that it can accept the connection, and then complete your entry into the environment. And there is also a timeout on this process in case something happens to go wrong. So this will take a maximum of 5 minutes. The message has now changed to say waiting for remote PC, which is your indication that the VM has powered on and we're waiting for the agents to respond and finish the connection process. And we're getting now the securing remote connections, and we are on the desktop. So great job, everybody. Start VM on Connect works. That's part one of this particular session. The next part is going to be how do we manage the users in the environment? We have several group policies that are going to help us here, and the first one is around screen security. Now, I've done it, you've done it, we've all stepped away from our computers without locking them. This can be a security concern because folks can be allowed to use WVD from anywhere, like public coffee shops or the local library, as well as working from home. So it's always a best practice to lock your computer when you step away, even for a few minutes. And we have 4 group policies that are going to work together to help take care of this. In your Group Policy Management console, go ahead and open your WVD policy if you have one. If not, just create a new one. Navigate to the User Policies, Administrative Templates, Control Panel, Personalization, and then in there you want to select Enable Screensaver and enable that policy. The next one is to force a specific screensaver, and the one that I like to use here is the 3D text screensaver because it's pretty simple. But you can select any screensaver you want as long as it's on all of your virtual machines. The third policy you'll find here is one that will protect the screensaver. This is going to enforce a password before that screensaver can be turned off and the user log back in. And finally, there is a policy to prevent changing the screensaver, and that's so users can't disable this function. So that'll handle all of the security around your screens for your sessions, but let's take a look at computer policies next. And there are 4 policies here as well. Under Computer, go to your policies, then open Windows Settings, Administrative Templates, Windows Components, Remote Desktop Services, Remote Desktop Session Hosts, and then Session Time Limits. And the first policy here is to set time limit for active Remote Desktop Services sessions. This is a hard limit for any session that is running, and once the time limit has been reached, a user will get a pop-up warning that gives them 2 minutes before they become disconnected. Now, if they happen to miss the message, no worries, because their session won't be logged off. It'll still be active, they'll just be disconnected from it, and they can simply log back in. Now, because of what this policy does, and the length of an average workday being generally 8 hours, that's what I set my policy for. The next policy is just for remote applications, and this is called Set Time Limit for Log Off of Remote App Sessions. And this policy will allow you to specify how long a user's remote app session will remain in a disconnected state. This is very useful because when a user closes their last WVD remote application, their session is still active on the VM. And because they never got logged out, they just closed the program, this will help their sessions log off of the machine. Now, how long you set this policy for will be up to you and how you run your environment, so it's kind of up to you here. but I set this for 8 hours as a maximum as well. That way I'm sure nobody's going over the normal business hours. The third policy here is for users that are still logged on with an active session, but have become idle. Now, idle means that there is no user input. They're not typing anything, they're not moving the mouse, everything's just there. Now, this could imply that the user walked away, so we can set a time limit. Once the time limit is reached, the session will go from idle to disconnected. And the users will also get a 2-minute warning before any of that happens, so they can just hit a key on the keyboard or just move the mouse in order to keep their session alive. Now, once these policies have done their thing, all of these users who are idle will now be disconnected. So we have one final policy, and that is called Set Up Time Limit for Disconnected Sessions. Once this limit is reached, those disconnected users will be logged off of their virtual machines. And with all of these group policies together, you'll be able to manage your users out of the WVD environment so we can do the next part, and that is deallocate the VM so you can save some money. And like I said at the beginning, there's nothing in the Start VM on Connect service that will do anything to stop your virtual machines. So what I'm going to show you here is just features of Azure virtual machines, not WVD. Here in the Azure portal, I've gone to one of my virtual machines, and in the blade, you want to scroll down till you get to the operations section. In there, click Auto Shutdown. Here you can set a daily schedule to deallocate your VM at the end of your workday, like 6 p.m. Don't forget to set your time zone as well. And it's that simple. You can even deploy this as part of your ARM templates for your VMs. And this will power down your VMs at the same time every day, helping you to save money while still empowering your users with the Start VM on Connect feature so that they can log in whenever they need to. And all of this balanced by the group policies that we talked about that'll help manage the users in the environment, keep things secure, and help them out of the system when they don't log off properly. Now, to get started, you'll need at least one host pool, and you want to make sure that the session host limit, which you can find in the properties of that host pool, is not set to the default of 99999. Otherwise, you'll need a massive environment to do any scaling, so I've got mine set for 3 in this example. Finally, the Azure Virtual Desktop service will need to be granted permissions over your virtual machine session host so that it can do all of the powering on and off. And with all that, we need to start by creating a custom role. So just open the subscription that you want to deploy and you can follow along. On the left, you want to go to Access Control, and at the top, go ahead and click the Add button and then select Add a Custom Role. Now you want to make this real easy on yourselves and just click the radio button to start from JSON. Now in the video description down below, I've got a link that's titled AutoScale RBAC that looks just like this. And that'll take you out to my GitHub page. Copy that and then click the blue button here and then just paste it in the box and hit open. That'll load the template with everything you need. Now on the permissions tab, you can see all of the different rights that you're creating in this role, which has to do with the powering on and off and some other functions that you can read on yourself. Then go to the Assignable Scopes tab, and here is where you'll have to delete the little placeholder that I've got. And now you're going to need to add your own scope. So click on the Assignable Scopes button. And then if you have management groups like I do, you'll see those here displayed first. You want to change this column here to subscriptions, and then you'll see your subscriptions all listed here. Find the one that you want, select that, and then hit the select button at the bottom. That's all the changes we need to make here. Go ahead and hit the Review and Create button and then build it. Once that's done, just to show you that it's here, go back to the Roles tab and then change the filter to look at Custom Roles. Then you'll see there we have Desktop Virtualization AutoScale. Now we need to assign this new role to the AVD service. So click the Add button at the top once again and then click Add Role Assignment. And over here on the right at the top, click the drop down for your roles and type the word AutoScale. And there you see Desktop Virtualization AutoScale. Select that, and then the third box down is who you are granting the rights to. In there, just type Windows Virtual Desktop. Select that and hit Save at the bottom. Now that we have our permissions all assigned, we need to create a new resource called a scaling plan. So over here in the AVD Admin Center, on the left, you can see that new item in the blade, Scaling Plans. Go ahead and click on that. Select the same subscription that you assigned the permissions to earlier, and here you can either use an existing resource group or create a new one. I'll call my scaling plan here AutoScale, and then I'll set my location for East US 2. Give it a friendly name and a description, and then at the bottom, go ahead and select your time zone. And notice at the very bottom that the host pool type here is pooled. So personal pools are not supported at this time. And stick with me because later on in the video, I'll have some tips for how you can use something similar to a scaling plan on your personal host pools. You don't want to miss that. And then at the bottom here, you have an exclusion tag. And this will tell the scaling plan to ignore those particular hosts when it's doing its magic. Click Next, and then at the top, you want to click to add a schedule. Now for your very first schedule, this is going to be filled out somewhat for you. And that's just to give you an idea of what you should be doing. So notice that the name here is weekdays schedule, and then all of the different weekdays are selected. And you can mix and match the days however it works in your environment. Just be aware that at this point, there is only one schedule for any given day. So if you include Monday here, you won't be able to add Monday to another schedule. Once you're happy with your choices here, click Next. On the Ramp Up tab, this is where we can set our time trigger. That's of course when everything is going to start, and notice that the load balancer algorithm is breadth first, which is what people usually use. Now the next two items may need a little bit of explanation, and that's the minimum percentage host and capacity threshold. So let's say that we have 10 hosts in our pool, and each one of them is allowed to accept 10 user connections. So at 20%, AutoScale will make sure that there are 2 hosts running and available for their connections. Once you get to 60% of that total capacity, AutoScale will turn on more hosts. And you can play with the numbers here as you like. When you're ready, click Next. And on the Peak Hours tab, we've got something really cool. Generally, like I said, folks set up their pools as breadth first. And that allows you to stack your users evenly across all VMs, which is very important in your logon storm. But notice that the load balancing algorithm now says depth first. And this means that AutoScale knows that we want to have the fewest number of VMs as possible, and we're already past that logon storm. And so we want to switch that algorithm now so that we stack the most number of users as possible onto each host so that we have the fewest number of hosts running. Go ahead and hit Next. And in the Ramp Down tab, we've reached the end of our day, and we want to help our users get logged off properly. Now the load balancer algorithm here is still depth first because we want the fewest number of hosts running, but notice now that your minimum percentage is now 10% and your capacity threshold is now 90, which means that each host will have to have more sessions on it. So for my earlier example of 10 hosts in the pool, each one taking 10 connections, that means that we will have one host minimum running and it will be able to accept 9 connections before the next host will be turned on. Now you'll also have the ability here to force user sessions to log off and use that with care. Because the last thing you want is to get unexpected calls from the users to the help desk complaining about the service. And this would probably be a good time to mention that you should be combining your user log-offs with the group policies or endpoint manager policies for user idle and disconnect sessions so that everyone gets managed out of the environment properly, and I've covered those all in previous videos. And I'll link to that again at the end so that you can catch up. Click Next, and we are finally at the off-peak hours. This is how things run in the evening. Notice that we're still in depth mode. That way, if any users do need to log on off hours, there are the fewest number of VMs running as possible, and our capacity threshold is still at 90%. Once you're happy, click Add at the bottom. And there is your schedule. Now you can, as I said earlier, have multiple schedules, but you are limited to one schedule for any given day. And with some quick editing magic, now I've got a schedule for weekdays and one for weekends. And the weekend settings are done in such a way to keep the fewest number of hosts running as possible, which will help to continuously reduce cost, which is a benefit for all of you. Click Next to add your host pool assignments, and notice that there's a checkbox there to enable AutoScale. Now you don't have to have that selected, and you can simply just create the plan and the schedules without it and then assign them later, which I'll show you in a minute. But I'm good with doing it right now, so I'll click the drop down for the host pool, select any of the host pools I want to apply this schedule to, and note that the schedule will take place immediately. So whatever time it is, that's what the pool is going to start doing. So just keep that in mind. Click Next and add your tags. And those will help you keep track of what's going on in the environment, and you could even put a tag in there for the kind of schedule that you have. And once you're ready, hit create. And in just a moment, you'll have a brand new scaling plan resource. So let me give you the quick tour since this is new for everybody. In the middle of the screen, we see how many schedules we have in our plan and how many pools we're assigned to. Over on the left, you've got the properties section in the blade, and that's where you can change your time zone and also manage that exclusion tag I mentioned earlier. Under the host pool assignments, you can add or remove pools that are being managed by your plan. And under your schedules, you can modify your current schedules and create new ones. Just keep in mind, like I said earlier, at this point, every day can only be assigned to one schedule. Now, this preview has been running privately for a little while, and there were some good questions and feedback that came in. So I'm going to go through some of those here because you might have been thinking of some of this too. And one of those things you might be thinking of is that this is really great, but I really want to run my host pool with 0 hosts running. And I really like that idea too, but capacity thresholds are the thing to think about here. As long as there is at least one active session, you'll need at least one host running. So you may not be able to get down to 0 in the first place. And for all of those users who, forget to log off and just close the window, you will have your group policies or endpoint manager policies to help users who forget to log off properly to go from idle to disconnected to logged off. Then the AutoScale will do its magic to turn off as many hosts as possible. Next question is, will AutoScale provision new hosts and delete them? That's another great idea, but no, at this time it will not. And if you're interested in that feature being added, again, comment down below and let me know. What about configuring your hosts for special holidays? So you'd have your standard schedule for your Monday through Friday and your weekends, and then other holidays that would override the particular day, no matter what it is. Again, another really great idea, but not supported at this time because there's the current limitation of one day can only be assigned to one schedule. But if you're interested, again, let me know and we'll upvote that. Another really good question is, what do these scaling plans cost? And the great news is there's actually no cost for the scaling plans at all, just like the rest of the Azure Virtual Desktop resources. Your cost in AVD comes from your virtual machines, your storage, and your network. The AVD resources themselves don't cost anything. Now, what about combining the AutoScale feature with something else like Start VM on Connect? And there have been several requests for these two features to work together, and this will work with your pooled host pools. And I also mentioned that there are personal host pools that are not supported by AutoScale. So for those, you should use Start VM on Connect, which will manage those for you. And you can combine that with the auto shutdown feature. So at the end of the business day, you turn those VMs off, and then the user will start it back up whenever they need to. Now here's a video off the Azure Academy YouTube channel, and you can see that performance isn't so hot and the picture doesn't look so great. And the reason for all of this is because as the video stream plays in Azure Virtual Desktop, it actually has to encode and decode in the browser and then send that back over the wire and then encode and decode again on your client. And that's what kills all of your performance, which you can see here in the task manager. The CPU's pegged pretty much at 100%. And this is the problem that our multimedia redirection is going to help us fix. So the directions that we're going to follow today are linked in the video description, and they go out, of course, to the Azure Virtual Desktop documentation so that you can check those out later. Now, as of today, the multimedia redirection feature is in preview, so this is only going to work on your Windows client, and that client needs to be at least version 1.2.2222 or later. So go ahead and sign into your AVD session, which I'll do with the user's cyborg. And then you're going to want to go to this link, and that's going to download and install an MSI file, which is going to have the multimedia redirection service. Now, this will require admin permissions, and it'll just take a minute to install. Part of this is also going to set up your browser extension for Edge, but if that has a problem, or you're using another browser like Chrome, the links for those extensions are in the documentation so that you can go and download them directly. And that'll just take you out here to the Edge and Chrome extension stores. And we're actually going to install the Chrome extension manually since it's not going to happen through the service. And if you've never installed an extension before, it's just usually one click and you're done. And now up in the browser, you can see the icon for AVD, letting us know that the extension is ready to roll. Now, the next thing we're going to need to do is add a registry key. And this is not in our virtual desktop session host. This is on your local client computers. So open your registry and you want to go to HKey local machine, software, Microsoft, MSRDC, and then in there you'll have a policies folder. And here we want to add a new string value, and that will be called release ring with no spaces, and the value for that will be the word insider. Then go ahead and close your registry. Now what I want you to do is close any AVD sessions that you currently have running, and then go ahead and shut off your AVD client, and then turn it back on. You may get a client update. If so, install it. Now, by default, during the preview, YouTube is specifically not enabled. But no worries, we can fix this by editing our Edge group policy, or if you're using Chrome, the Chrome group policies. Now, for those of you who need to download the group policies for Edge, which I have linked in the video description down below, just go ahead and select whichever policy you want. I'll take Windows 64-bit, click the accept and download, and then that'll give you a cab file. Go ahead and unzip all of the files in there until you get down to the ADMX folder. Then you're going to want to copy that into where you have the rest of your group policies. And then we can go to our group policy management console. Go ahead and create a new policy for Edge, then go ahead and edit the policy. Go to your computer configuration, policies, administrative templates, and under there you should see Microsoft Edge. Inside there, go to the extensions folder, and then you want to edit the configure extension management settings. Go ahead and set that to enabled, and now we have to put something in this field, which you will find over here in the AVD documentation. And if you happen to be using Chrome, that's just a little further down the page. Go ahead and copy that section, and then go back to group policies, drop it right in there, and hit OK. And now your session hosts are going to need to get their policy update, and you've got basically three choices. You can either do a GP update force, or you can reboot them all, or you can just wait and it'll happen automatically eventually. Either way, once you're done, you can do a GP result, and there's my Edge policy, and you can double check the value if you look at the resultant set of policy by typing RSOP. And it looks like we're good to go. So we'll go back to the Azure Academy YouTube channel and play our video in full screen, and it looks good, it sounds good, and we check our CPU in the task manager. We are nowhere near hitting 100%. And we've got a green check mark in the browser extension letting us know that everything is working just fine. Azure Active Directory is a modern authentication protocol. It uses things like SAML and OAuth, but a traditional Active Directory uses NTLM and Kerberos. Now, the Kerberos authentication protocol is named for that three-headed dog because this protocol has three different components. Now, when I open up a command prompt here, I can type in the command klist, and I can see all of my Kerberos tickets. And if we look here at the very last ticket, you'll see that my client is the user Cyborg. The application in this case is a CIF share, which is a file server. And at the bottom, we see the KDC, and that's my domain controller. So Kerberos is kind of old news, right? So why are we talking about this? Well, remember I said Azure Active Directory uses these new identity services like OAuth and SAML. Well, to help all of us modernize and get past a lot of our old dependencies on Kerberos that tie us down to traditional infrastructure, Azure Active Directory now has a new Kerberos service. And because Azure Active Directory is a multi-tenant cloud identity service, this is being implemented differently than in your traditional domains. Now, as of this recording, the Kerberos realm in Azure Active Directory is in preview, so things are going to improve as we go. Now, to make this all work, you're going to need three different things, just like the Kerberos process itself. We'll need our virtual machines to be Azure AD joined, and then we'll need to configure a few things on them. We, of course, need the service that we're going to access. In this case, that's going to be Azure Files, and we're going to use it for our FS Logics profiles in Azure Virtual Desktop. And then we'll need to configure an Azure Active Directory application, which is going to function as our service principal, so Azure AD can talk to our file share and complete the Kerberos authentication process. Now, for your user accounts during the preview, they still need to be hybrid users, meaning that they need to be synced from your traditional Active Directory over to Azure Active Directory using Azure AD Connect. So we're not at that 100% cloud-only experience yet, where we can just depend on the cloud services, but we're getting close to the end of that journey, so stick with us and we'll get there before you know it. Okay, so the first thing that we need to get all this working is a storage account. That was easy. Now just make sure that this storage account is not currently using AD authentication, either to a traditional domain or Azure AD domain services. The two things are not compatible with Kerberos at this time. Now that we have a storage account, we need to create that Azure AD application so that Azure AD has something it knows how to talk to. Then we're going to have to set up all the right API permissions to make that communication work. And thankfully, that process has already been scripted out for you here in the Azure documentation. What I've done here is copied all of these different PowerShell blocks and put it into VS Code. And then I can just run the script. And once it's done successfully, you should see at the bottom there that success, password is set up for whatever the name of your storage account is. And if you go over to your storage accounts and look at your file shares, you see that you've got a banner here at the top that shows Azure AD Kerberos is set up. So now for the API permissions. Over in Azure Active Directory on the left, we want to go to App Registrations, find your storage account, open it, and then we want to set your API permission. Go ahead and click to add a new permission, and then we want to select from the Microsoft Graph a delegated permission. Select OpenID, and then you want to select that and the one right under it. Click to add your permissions at the bottom, and now we need to add one further permission, which is also under the Microsoft Graph, and that is the user.read. So just type that into your search, select it, add it, and then we have one final step we have to do to authenticate. And this step needs to be completed by someone with the global administrator permissions, because allowing the Kerberos realm into your Azure Active Directory tenant impacts the tenant as a whole, so therefore it has to be done by a global admin. So just click to add admin consent for your 3 permissions, and we're good to go. So speaking of permissions, we have to set the permissions on our file share so all of our users can access it. For the share level, go back to your storage account and then go to Access Control, and then take a look at your role assignment. Notice that we have granted already the virtual machine login rights for our admin and our standard AVD users. This is needed on any Azure AD Join system so that people can log on to the machine. And we're going to want to mirror those same permissions for our file share. So click to add permissions at the top and add a role assignment. In the search box over there in the middle, type SMB, and then you want to select first here the elevated contributor role. This is that admin level role that can change NTFS permission. Click Next, and then in the middle of the screen, you want to click to choose a member, and then from the picker here, choose your virtual desktop administrator. Select Add at the bottom, and then review and add the assignment. Now let's repeat and add a regular users group. Add a role assignment, type SMB, and this time we want the share contributor. This will give them the rights to do whatever they want on the file share, but they can't change permissions. Click Next and select your members and choose your standard FSLogix or virtual desktop users group. Add and then review and assign that role. So now you see at the bottom here, I've got 4 different roles. The share contributor and the VM user logins match, and then the admin login and the elevated contributor match. Now there are 2 ways to set our directory level permissions, the command line way and the Windows Explorer way. If you choose the command line way, you would do that with iCackles, and it would look something like this. And there's a whole bunch of commands and switches that you can do to set the permissions exactly as you want. But since this is a video, we'll do the more visual way and use the Windows shell. Now to use the Windows way, at this point in the preview, we actually have to run another PowerShell command to give us that shell experience, because it's not built in and native just yet, but it will be soon. Over in the Azure Docs, you'll see this large block of code, which you'll copy and just put into PowerShell. And you're going to need some specific PowerShell modules on your system for this to work, like Active Directory, az.accounts, az.storage, and Azure AD. Now I've added above that PowerShell code that we pasted 3 different variables just to make my life easy, and that's for resource group name, storage account name, and domain name. That way you can edit those variables and just run this command on different shares or different domains over and over. Now once you executed all of that code, you can open your File Explorer and go to your new file share, right-click on the background and go to Properties, the Security tab, and then the Advanced button at the bottom. Now we have 3 specific permissions that we should be setting at our directory level so our users can't impact each other. And this is found here in the FSLogix documentation, and I'll link to this in the video description. Back in our permissions, we need to change our creator-owner role so it only has modify access and at subfolders and files only. Then you can add a new permission, and thanks to that PowerShell we just ran, the picker shows our domain as our location. So I'll type in the name of my users group, which for me is WVD users, click the check name, and it's all good. And these folks are going to need to modify at this folder only. And finally, the admin role, who should have full control over this folder, subfolders, and files. Click Apply, and you're good to go. And the third part of our 3-headed dog is to configure our session host virtual machine. And because this is a Windows 11 multi-session system, FSLogix has already been installed for me. So all I need to do is set up my FSLogix configuration in the registry. Speaking of policies, we do need a specific group policy to be enabled on our clients to allow communication through Kerberos in the cloud. Now, if you're using Windows 11, this policy is already on your systems. But if you're using Windows 10, then you must have the KB 5007253 update, and that's linked in the documentation. When you have all that, you should see this policy on your client. Just enable that, and then there's one last thing, and that is a registry key. You see, when you use Azure Active Directory with a roaming profile solution like FSLogix, the credential keys are stored in your credential manager, and they must belong to the profile that's currently loading. This is what lets your profile log on to many different VMs instead of being limited to just one. Now, once you've completed all of that, go ahead and log out of any active sessions in Virtual Desktop, and this will make sure that you have your latest Azure AD primary refresh token. And when you log back in, you'll see FSLogix is starting up. And after that login is complete, go ahead and open a command prompt and type in the command klist. And at the bottom, you can see a CIF share, and this is for our FSLogix user profiles. And the user here is Cyborg, the server or application is a storage account, and the KDC is the new Azure AD Kerberos realm, kerberos.microsoftonline.com. And if we check out the status of our machine with the command dsregcmd/status, we can see our system is Azure AD joined only. This is not joined to a traditional domain at all. Everything is coming through Azure Active Directory. And back in Azure AD, if you scroll down on the left there for your sign-in logs, you can see for me that the third one down is Cyborg logging onto a storage account. So click that, and you can see the 3 different components of Kerberos. Our client is Cyborg, the application is my storage account, and the KDC token issuer is Azure AD. And all of that is done using the Kerberos agent you see there at the bottom. So what's the value of Azure Image Builder, and why should you care? Well, lots of customers have challenges in creating custom images, and that's because image creation is a specialized skill set. You need to know the operating system very well. You also need scripting and application packaging and layering, as well as skills in deployment tools. And this is especially true in the case of Azure, where you need to know how the cloud platform works so that you can create and deploy your images. And if you're creating and building those images at scale, you're going to need a very well-defined process and pipeline so that you can automate everything and do those images month to month or quarter to quarter. And this is the problem that Azure Image Builder is here to solve. By describing your custom images within a template and passing that to a cloud service that handles the automation and complexity of all of that for you, it makes building images really easy. So now we're ready to do step number 1, which is to set up our environment and variables. So we'll just copy all of that code and drop it in the Cloud Shell. And then if we go back to the Azure portal, this step has created for us a resource group called WVD Image Demo RG in WestUS 2. And we've also set a couple other variables, so we're ready for the next step. In this next section, we'll create our managed identity for us. Now, one thing that I'll call out that happened to me once in a while is when I ran this first command. This is to get the current date and time in an appropriate format. When I would run that command, and I'll do it right now, and then show you what's in that variable, it's a string of numbers, and that's exactly what it should be. However, sometimes I've seen it return with a string of numbers, a dot, and then a couple other numbers. If that happens to you, you will get an error because that is an invalid naming format for a managed identity. Now, if that happens, don't panic because there's a real easy way to fix it with PowerShell. So you go back to the original command, and then what we need to do is we need to do a split. So we're going to add another set of parentheses here, and then inside the last parenthesis, we'll type .split. And when you do a split, you need to tell it what it is that it's going to be the indicator of where things split. In this case, we'll use that period. So we need another set of parentheses, and in there put a single quote, period, single quote. That'll give you two values, the part before the period and the part after the period. So we need just that first part, which you can select with a square bracket, 0, square bracket. Okay, so if you run into that problem, just modify your code that way and you will be golden. In this case, however, we are just fine. So I'm going to run this block of code. And like I said, this is going to create that managed identity for us. It's also going to download a couple PowerShell modules for the image builder so that we can assign all of our permissions correctly. Now, you may get this message also about an untrusted repository, because for those PowerShell modules, we have to get them from somewhere, and that somewhere is the PowerShell gallery. So if you've never registered that as a trusted provider, you'll get this message, and you can just hit yes or yes to all, and then that'll download and set up our modules. And the last command will be to create our managed identity, and then from that identity, we'll set up a couple other variables for the ID and the principal ID, because that's how we're going to assign permissions to it in just a second. So I'll just clear the screen here and we can move on to the third block. And now we're ready to assign permissions to our new managed identity. So let me copy these first couple lines and we'll run that. And when we do a ls, we can see that the file has been downloaded to our local file system. So if I can cat that file, it looks exactly like all the permissions that we assigned manually a few moments ago. So now we need to update the contents of this file to have our proper scope as well as the proper name for our role definition. So let me clear the screen here. And we'll run these next lines, which are going to do all of that work. And then once that's done, we can cat our file again. And there we go. We've changed our scope and the image definition name. So now we are ready to create a new role definition, copy and execute that. And that's good. So now we should be able to add our new role assignment. So I'll clear the screen again and we'll run that. And again, if you happen to see an error saying that the role assignment does not exist, just give it a couple minutes and then try it again because it just hasn't processed everything yet. And there we go. That's all successful now. And so now we can go and create our shared image gallery, which we'll just copy and execute all this code, and we'll just paste that. Now, while that is going, the last command here goes and creates an image definition, which is something that we did not do manually. And a definition is the kind of the wrapper that goes around the image that you need in order to use the shared image gallery. There you go. Our gallery is now created, and it'll take just a moment to create our image definition. While it is doing that, let's take a look at creating our image templates. So now in setting up our image templates, of course, we're working with WVD, so that means Windows 10 for most of us. And we, of course, have multiple options like Windows 10 multi-session or Windows 10 Enterprise, which would be single session. So if you're working with a pooled host pool, like most of you are, then you'll want to make sure that this is what you're referencing as your image source. And I'll show you where that is exactly in just a second. And if you're using a different thing like Windows Server, then of course you're going to want to make sure you have those values in here. Now, if you want to find what images are available in your particular region, we can run this next command, and that'll show you all the different SKUs of the image that are available in your particular region. Okay, like you can see here that this SKU for Windows 10 multi-session is 20H2-EVD. and that is right up here. And that's how you can find and build these things through PowerShell, or what you could do is just go to any one of your virtual machines. And then from your virtual machine over here on the top right, you want to click the JSON view. And if you look at the storage profile, that'll have the exact information that we're looking for. So while we're here in the portal, let's look at what we've done through PowerShell. We've created this new resource group, WVD Image Demo RG. There's our new managed ID, and when we go to there, we've got our role assignment, and that's from that custom role that we created, image builder definition with a number. Back in the resource group, here's our shared image gallery, and we have an image definition. And you can see the image definition here inside the shared image gallery. And when you go into the definition, this is where we will have our image versions. And we're going to create that image version from this template file. And we'll just download that. And there you can see is our template file. So let's cat that. And this is a normal standard ARM template. So you've got your parameters section here at the top. And then we have our resource, which in this case is a virtual machine image template. And it's got some of your typical stuff here like an API version, location, and tags. It also has a managed identity, which is the one that we created earlier. And then it has properties. So the first one here I want to tell you about is the VM profile. This is the size of the virtual machine that AIB is going to spin up to do your image. And this is part of where that cost comes from that I mentioned in the beginning. Now keep in mind that this virtual machine will only be alive long enough to create your image and then capture it. And you could use any virtual machine SKU here, but the important thing to note is that whatever it is that you're doing, as part of all the customizations, which we'll look at in a second, you need to have enough resources on that virtual machine to do the job. So if, for example, you're installing a bunch of applications and scripts and things, and you need to have 4 CPU cores and 16 gigs of RAM, then this particular VM size is not going to cut it. So just go ahead and edit that in your template, and you get the appropriate VM size. And then we have the source that we referenced earlier. Now for source, we've got a couple options. This particular code is pulling from one of the Azure Marketplace images. Now, if you're using a different custom image that you already have created on premise, you're going to need to upload that into Azure into a storage account, deploy a virtual machine from that virtual hard drive file, and capture that as an Azure managed image, because we would need the image ID, which you would put here instead of all of this stuff. Now this particular file does have an older version of Windows 10, so I want to modify that. So I'll click up here at the top to open the editor, and then I'll load up my ARM template file here. And this is basically running VS Code in your Cloud Shell. So let me scroll down, and so I've changed that to 20H2 EVD, changed my VM size while I was here to B2MS. I like that size. Got 2 CPU core and 8 gig of RAM, and it's burstable. And then if you're using a custom image, you can also alter the size of the OS disk. But if you're pulling from a marketplace image, then just leave that at 127. And I'll just clear my screen and cat the file again. Now I'm going to skip past the customizations for now and come back to it in just a second, because at the end here we have the distribute section, and that's where we're sending our image to the shared image gallery to a particular image definition of the Win10 WVD that we just created through our script. And then we have our replication regions. Now by default, you need to have this in the region where your shared image gallery lives, but we could also add, if we wanted to, the other regions that we want our image ultimately to be in. In the example I gave earlier, we had 5 regions. And you can do that, but I would suggest that you don't, because again, it will take time to replicate to all of those regions, and so you won't know that everything is done and worked perfectly before you replicate it out. So if something happened to go wrong, then you'd have to delete all those other images and replicas. So it's easier and faster, in my opinion, to just do this to one region and then replicate them after all of that is done, which we'll get into in a minute. Let's get back to this customize section, because this is where all the magic really happens. So we've taken our source image and deployed a new VM from it. Now we're going to take all of these different commands, PowerShell code, etc., and then run that against that virtual machine. And so we could literally do anything here. So for example, we have optimizing the OS from the virtual desktop team. And if we open this code and take a look, here's the PowerShell that it's actually going to run. So we're setting up some variables here for the environment, then referencing the desktop optimization tool that we're going to download as a zip, expand all of the files in that zip, do a couple more things, and then execute the optimization script. So again, your PowerShell could literally do anything. Now, when it comes to some of the other things here, like Windows Restart, that's a native feature inside the image builder. So you'd want to call that a type of Windows Restart. And then there's a comment here writing out to the screen so you know what's going on in your logs. And you've got a timeout here for the restart. So if we scroll down a little more, we've also got Windows Update as a native feature. And this is set for a update limit of 40 updates. Now again, if you're deploying updated images frequently, then that should be no problem. So now we're going to submit our image for creating our template, and that'll be just the standard resource group deployment. So we'll paste that code. And so this is going to create our image template, which is a new kind of resource. And back in the Azure portal, if we refresh, now we have an image template. So there's a couple things to point out here in this new resource. One is that there is our SKU. This is our source image and what we're pulling from. We'll also be able to see the build state and whatever the current message is from the image builder. We've got our distribution point, and that's our shared image gallery. You can also kick off your build or stop your build from up here. Then we also have our JSON view, and this is the exact ARM template that we uploaded a little while ago, where we're pulling the source image from, as well as all of our customizations that are going to do the work. And so our next thing is to build our VM image, and that'll be done with a new PowerShell command. This is start AZ image builder template, referencing the particular resource group and the particular image template file. So let's drop that here in our Cloud Shell and kick it off. And right away, our cursor is returned to us. And that's really nice because what we're going to be able to do now is run some other PowerShell to check on the status. So we're taking the getAZ image builder template that we just kicked off and putting that in the variable $getStatus. So to make it a little bit easier for you to see all the status here in PowerShell, $getStatus last run status run state. That'll tell you if we are running or if we're failed. Then there is the last run status message. Now we saw this a moment ago inside the template code. So let me pull that up so you can see what I'm talking about. So here's the customization for Windows Restart. You can see that it has a check command of write host restarting post teams install. That would be one of the status messages that you would see. And then we have the last run sub state, and that tells you which step in the process it's currently doing. And we'll just run this entire section again, and you do have to run it all again so that you can refresh the data that's in the get status variable. And so our current status is that it's running and it is building. So if we go back to the Azure portal, let me full screen this guy, and we hit refresh up here at the top, you can see the status is running and building. And there is no message currently, but when we get to something in the build process, like after that Teams install, when there's the reboot, you'll see a status message for that. Back in our resource groups, we've got our WVD image demo resource group that we've been working with. And now we've got a new one with a IT underscore and then the same name of the resource group. So if we open that up, this is our staging resource group. And we can see that there is currently a deployment that's going on and we've got a bunch of resources spinning up. So of course, the next big question is, how long will all of this take? Well, as usual, it depends. It depends first on your source image. How big was that image? Because we have files that we have to transfer. Then there are all of the customization steps. You are not limited in the number of customizations that you can have. So if, for example, you wanted to run 50 scripts and install 20 applications, you can do that. And that will all take some amount of time. Once all of that is done, again, it will depend on how many reboots you have and then capturing the image. And as far as the capturing that image, uploading it into the gallery for your very first replica in your very first region, that will happen relatively quickly. So for me, pulling an image from the Azure Marketplace, doing these particular customizations of installing and setting up FSLogix, the Windows 10 optimization script, and installing Teams with 2 reboots and running Windows Update, this will take about 45 minutes or so for it to run. But through the magic of Azure, I'll take you through a time warp and we're done. There you go, our image has finished building and we've got our last run state here as succeeded. So if we take a look back at our resource group, we've got a new item here and this is our image version. which you can either click on directly or go through the shared image gallery. And we'll click on our image definition, and there is our version. So in our version at the top here, you can deploy a virtual machine directly or a virtual machine scale set. And if we go over here on the left to update replication, you'll see that our one region of West US 2 has completed and there is one replica. So now if we need multiple replicas in West US 2, we can just change this number. Say for example, we need 10 replicas, and I've added all the other regions that I need to support for this deployment, as well as all of the replica counts that I need in each of those regions. And then you just have to hit save and just wait for the replication. Take another look back at our repository, because there are also some cleanup steps if you're done with Azure Image Builder. And you can remove your templates and clean up your role assignments and delete the resource group. And the cleanup steps here are completely optional and up to you and how you want to work, because you may want to have these things sitting around from month to month. It just makes the deployment and update process a little bit easier. And let me give you just a quick tour around this GitHub repo that we've been looking at. So this is the main repo page of the image builder. If we go to solutions, we'll see number 14 here, building a WVD image, and that's the repo that we've been directly working from in this session. Notice right underneath that is Azure DevOps. So there is a Azure DevOps extension for Azure Image Builder, so it'll integrate directly with your build and release pipelines. So I've created a new Azure DevOps project, and I'll go up here to the marketplace and go to Browse, and I'll just search for the Azure Image Builder. And we've got two items here. This second one is a pre-release version if you want to see the very latest things, but I'll just go with the current version, and we'll get that for free and install that into my DevOps. And in that DevOps repo, we can go to the build pipeline, and then we can scroll down quite a ways because we've done all of these prerequisites in our beginning steps manually. And you can pick it up right here with create a DevOps project if you need to do those steps. Once your project is created, we can go over here to our repos, and then at the bottom here, click Initialize. And just to save some time, I uploaded the same files from the WVD repo we were working with earlier, and then you would go and create a release pipeline. So under the pipeline section here, we'll just go to Releases, create a new pipeline, and then we want to start from an empty job, and then just give your stage a name. I'll just call mine AIB and hit Save. You would load up your artifacts from your Azure repo by just selecting your project, and then your source, which would just be the repo itself. Select whatever branch you want to work with. Main branch is the only one that I have because I just created it, and you hit add. So that'll ingest all of the files that are in our repo. And then here you want to click on the job task, and under the agent job, go ahead and click the plus, and then search here for Image Builder. And then we'll add that, and that's the extension that we added just a moment ago. Then we just need to fill out the job. So in this first section is where you set up the subscription that you want to authorize your DevOps repo to work with, and where your resource group and region are to deploy your VMs and your image. The managed identity section, we need to grab the resource ID of our managed identity that we created, and then just paste that in here. For our source, I'm going to pull from the Azure Marketplace a Windows 10 multi-session version and pulling the latest of the image revisions. Under the Customize section for Windows, you of course want this to be PowerShell, and you can choose to run Windows Update right here in the process. The build path is where you can reference the repo that we created earlier, and just by selecting this folder, I'm going to ingest all three of our files. And then you just need to have the inline script to run them. Now the files are going to be downloaded to the C drive build artifacts folder, so just reference them from there. And you can either reference them individually or create one master script file to rule them all. Then we have to call out a storage account where we're going to have all of our logs and that VHD file that we're going to eventually create. And under the distribute section, we're going to go to the shared image gallery. So you need to put the resource ID for that and what regions you want to have your image replicated to. And the last thing that you need to do here is just set your VM size if you want to do that. Like I changed mine to B2MS. Hit save at the top, and now you've created a pipeline. So all you have to do is create the release and then just wait for the process to finish.
The info behind your screen generally comes in two forms.
telemetry data and personal data. The general telemetry is normally baked into your user license agreement that you accepted when you signed up for a service like Facebook, Google, Amazon, or even installed Windows. And what you can do about those is really a deep topic and deserves its own video. So if you want to see more about that, just subscribe and comment down below and let me know what you're interested in. As for your personal data, this is the stuff like your pictures, documents, and music. It's the stuff that you would really cry about if you lost it or if it leaked out for all the world to see. You know, like the embarrassing photos that they took of you at your aunt's Christmas party. You know who you are. And there's lots of ways to protect those things too. But on this channel, we focus more on the cloud. So as far as the personal data on your screen goes, this usually means you have to talk about OneDrive or whatever other cloud storage service you're using. And in OneDrive in particular, we now have a personal vault that will encrypt your data, but that's another video too. In the business world, protecting the data on your screen is just as much of a concern. And this is especially true in a service like Azure Virtual Desktop. And since those screens that your clients use can literally be anywhere and on any device, and since there are so many ways that your data could leak out of your environment, we have a lot of features to help protect you. Over here in the admin portal, go ahead and click on a host pool and then click on RDP properties. These are all the settings that control the look and feel of your environment. Just click over there on the device redirections tab. Here you can control almost everything that can come in or out of your session hosts. And the stuff at the top here is all your video conferencing stuff for things like Teams. Then underneath that are the local devices and resources. And there are 6 items here that can impact controlling your data: drives and storage, clipboards, COM ports, printers, smart cards, and USB devices. Now, when you log on to your client and open the Windows File Explorer, did you ever notice a whole bunch of drives down here at the bottom? Well, those drives are from your local computer that are being projected into your virtual environment. These could allow your users to bring their personal files into the corporate environment or take them out. And it's the same thing for your USB storage devices. Now, the clipboard is something that none of us really pay that much attention to, but if you've allowed the clipboard, then somebody could copy some sensitive corporate data and then paste it onto their local computer and just walk away with it. Now, there are a ton of settings here to consider, and it's all highly configurable. But keep this in mind. These settings are host pool specific, which means that if you want to allow printer redirection for some users but not for others, then you'll need another host pool for those folks with different settings. Now, when it comes to screen protection, there's 2 different things to think about. The first is protecting what's on your screen from your users, and then there's protecting your screens from everyone else. And in this age of cloud computing, don't ever forget the low-tech but no less effective method of snooping, like somebody watching directly over your shoulder. This can be especially important in public places like coffee shops or that weird sweaty person that you sat next to on your last economy flight. They can see what's happening on your screen way too easily. So if you're in one of those spaces a lot, this is where a privacy filter could be a great investment. It reduces the viewing angle of your screen, so you have to be right in front of it, otherwise it's all a blur. The other solution here is a feature that's called Screen Capture Protection. This blocks things like the print screen function or screen sharing software or even malicious software that might have creeped its way onto your laptop and might be trying to capture your screen. Now, this doc is linked in the video description down below, and you can see in the second paragraph here a link to download some policy files. So go ahead and download that and extract them, and you'll find you have 2 different files, and they need to be put into 2 different places. The .admx file needs to go into C Windows Policy Definitions, and the .adml file needs to go in one of the subfolders, the en-us there. Make sure that you've copied those onto all of your domain controllers, and then go ahead and open your Group Policy Management Editor. Go ahead and modify your existing virtual desktop policy and then navigate to the Computer Configuration, Administrative Templates, Windows Components, Remote Desktop Services, Remote Desktop Session Hosts, and Azure Virtual Desktop. Open and enable the Screen Capture Protection policy, and once your GPOs are updated on your host, you're done. The next time your users go to log in, your screens will be protected. And as you can see, or rather you can't see, my screen is invisible to you. You can see the RDP bar at the top there, but everything else is just hidden. And as you can imagine, depending on what your users are doing in their virtual desktop environment, this will have some consequences. As I said earlier, this will block the ability for screen sharing, and that includes presentations through Teams. And also, before you comment about this, yes, of course, someone could still physically take a picture of your screen with a camera. So comment below if you have an idea on how to take care of that problem. And I'll give you a shout out and share the best ideas in an upcoming video. Finally, on the Windows side of things, screen capture protection only works with the Windows desktop client and in full desktops only today. While on the macOS client, that'll protect your full desktops and remote apps. So thanks for joining me to protect what's on your screen. Go ahead and click over here and learn about all the other things you can do to protect your virtual desktop environment. And there is quite a lot, so I'll see you there. Happy learning.